Tonight we have Victor Acevedo doing a presentation about his illustrious career as an artist that spans over 40 years, I believe.
Inside of 40 years.
Inside of 40 years, yeah. So a long time. And his experience with using computers goes back into the 80s. Can we all remember a time when nobody had a computer? Do we remember that? Yeah. How many people got an Apple IIe? Yeah, like 1982 or whatever. Okay, so we're going back to this era. I remember I got one of the first IBM PCs that came out as well, maybe 1983, something like that. So there's many of us here who are, what's that? OS2, yeah, whose careers go back that far, exploring digital art as early adapters. And Victor's career is very exceptional in that regard. He goes as far back as Easy TV.
Yeah, the early days of Cyberspace Gallery, which I'll talk about a little bit.
Cyber Art Gallery, 18th Street Art Center. The reason why I bring that up is these are very important first moves for people organizing to present digital art and organize as artists as a community, exploring all the various avenues available with digital art. And what we do here is directly a product of that. So anyway, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Victor Acevedo.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it that you all turned out, and I'm honored with this chance to speak to you and share the story of my work, in a sense, a little encapsulation of my work going from traditional media, analog techniques into digital. And so I'm going to try to compress almost 40 years into 30 minutes, and we're going to have 3 sections. Anyway, this is sort of the time frame that I'm going to try to cover. So I include 1977, and that's 40 years ago. And that's when I started as a student. And then and I learned painting and drawing. I started at the University of New Mexico. I was born and raised in Los Angeles, but I had moved out there for a few years, and I kind of rekindled the idea of, I'm a visual artist and I'm going to study art. So I started taking classes there. Then I came back to Los Angeles and started going to Art Center College of Design. And then after I finished there, I started, while I was at Art Center, I got introduced to the concept of computer graphics. There was a few people there. Well, primarily the 2 people that were talking about it were Gene Youngblood, who I know a lot of you know. He's a very famous theorist. He wrote Expanded Cinema, a very influential book. And also James Blinn would come out to do lectures, and he would talk about this early rendering and ray tracing. So things kind of happen, not like with a sharp, this period ends and a new period begins. It sort of happens gradually. So from about 83 to 87, I kind of started morphing into being a digital artist. And for about 20 years, I was primarily focused on digital prints. At the time, I was thinking, well, this is pretty much, it's a hybrid of painting and photography. And from my vantage point, it was the new painting. But, it's kind of, you could look at it from different ways, but, it's certainly a new kind of photography, and it is a hybrid. And then I started getting more interested in time-based work. I was always interested in animation, 3D modeling, but I just took my time getting there. But some of my earliest inspirations had to do with computer animation, like Ed Emshwiller comes to mind, who I met from Cal Arts, and I think John maybe studied with Ed. And so he was very influential. I remember Gene Youngblood showed us a famous piece called Sunstone, for those of you who know Ed Emshwiller's work, and that just blew me away. I was seeing that in about 1980, and that was really influential. So anyway, and then I'm kind of following up now. I'm kind of getting into music video, but also a form called visual music, which tends to be more abstract and it could also be non-narrative, but it's very tightly rooted to music. So anyway, that's kind of the overview, which I'm going to try to cover. So this was a seminal experience for me. This is sort of like before I even thought, well, I'm going to be an artist. I was, as a little kid, I was about 10 years old, and I saw this image in probably a little encyclopedia for children, and I was just like, wow, blown away. I go, wow, I've never seen anything like this in my, young mind. But it just stuck with the persistence of memory. It's weird, across decades, across geographical space, a 10-year-old boy would look at this and go, wow. And M.C. Escher, so I'm kind of talking about some of my early influences that kind of sort of turned me on to visual art, just as sort of like an audience member, so to speak. M.C. Escher was very important. And I love this image, the curl-ups. I mean, this was really cool. And this one, Day and Night, M.C. Escher, this was really amazing for me. And it introduces the things, what I call the zoomorphic tessellation, the patterns that are articulated with recognizable animal forms, in this case birds. And you got the positive and negative toggling. It's a very, very amazing piece, Day and Night, 1951. Picasso and Braque were also very important for me. I loved how they dealt with space. And abstracted it, and I became aware of they were really important in the 20th century, very early on, and they were influenced by Cezanne. But you could look at the dates there. This is looking around 100 years ago or so. But what I liked about them is they were they were breaking down figure and ground, and they were connecting it. They were connecting the figure, and they were connecting the space between the background with form, with geometricized forms. Tuna fishing was really also very influential to me. It's one of my favorite pieces by Salvador Dali. And in retrospect, I thought, well, this is sort of almost like a Photoshop paradigm. It's like photo collage, but it was done, by hand, oil painting. But his source material were individual photographs that he would put together into this grand composition. So this is I really love that piece. So July 77, and I also want to share with you some kind of like really special moments along the way on my path that sort of like almost were like signposts. So in July 1977, I was in Spain, and I went to the Alhambra because M.C. Escher had gone to the Alhambra and made copies of the patterns, and that was the source of his pattern making. And he turned these non-abstract forms into animal forms, and all these. There's like 17 ways of tiling the plane in the 2D sense, and all of those are explored here in this palace here. So I went there. And I had this experience here at this portal looking out over the city. This is in the city of Granada, Spain. And they had some glass there. And this is a photograph from being there. And it kind of like reflected the periodic pattern that was nearby on the wall over the architectural scene below. And that was, it barely comes across in this photograph, but you can imagine this overlay of periodic space division on a recognizable scene. And it just kind of happened as a perceptual phenomena, even though it was a reflection, but it just kind of interlaced perfectly where it was like this composite. And it was very powerful. And I thought that was almost like a metaphor, a visual metaphor was born in that moment, this overlay of pattern. So in that same week, I didn't expect to meet Salvador Dali, but I did. I went to Haague where he was living, and his hometown is really close to there. It's called Figueres, and he has a museum there that he started in 1974. And this is about what he looked like. And we have gone to a restaurant. I was there with my family, and we didn't expect him to be there, but he came out across the hotel lobby. He was there with his wife, and I was able to shake his hand and show him one of my images. So that was like an amazing moment for me, because and that's about 40 years ago. So a couple of years later, kind of as a result of having that overlay perceptual experience, I started exploring that, and this is a January 79 periodic space division mapped over a recognizable animal form. So just kind of jamming on that concept. And then a couple of years later, I got a chance to go to the Escher Foundation, which was in the Haague. And they gave me special permission to study his notebooks before they had been published publicly. And this is one of my favorite images by Escher, called Smaller and Smaller. And on the right, it shows a woodcut. So this is literally a woodcut print. And so this is me back then, from 79. Yes, shows. And those on the right are examples of his notebooks. He did all these patterns. Oh, thank you. So, yeah, it was a great honor to be there. So these are just kind of some studies of, I wish I had a pointer, but some of the, this is my example of copying what he did. He used all this graph paper, and he would plot points to make the forms that would interlock. So it was very much like digital art, graphic, like spline-based vectors that are mapped over, a grid that could also be thought of as pixel locations. And he's using symmetry operations like that insect on the far right. He only had to draw half of it because it would be a mere symmetry. Okay. Anyway, so I'm going to accelerate, but that's part of this talk, is to share with you what I was thinking about and what I was interested in before I got into digital art. And so I was really into this sort of, art and mathematics, art and geometry, pattern and such, that lent itself, poured nicely into digital. So this is, under those influences, I made this pencil drawing, and then here's a colorized version. This is, I think, acrylic on cardboard. So I took a few years, and I kind of dabbled into this tessellation, zoomorphic tessellation, and I was getting into, I thought it would be nice to make oil paintings with these patterns, so I kind of did that a little bit. And then it occurred to me, through also with more outside influence, that you can have polygonal all space filling tilings, but you could also have all space filling polyhedra. And that's kind of what this is about. Those are what they call open packed polyhedral clusters there on the bottom right. So that was another way of exploring space in a periodic way. So some of those studies from the previous image, got applied in like a painting like this. And that's from 1981. So February '83, this was another one of those, turning point moments, and getting into all space filling polyhedra. I was also, Buckminster Fuller's work came known to me, so I had an opportunity to meet Bucky, interact with him a little bit, and that was also one of these life-changing episodes. So this is a plate in his book, and he wrote many books, but he wrote these two large books called Synergetics, the Geometry of Thinking, in 2 volumes, and this is a page. He has these color plates in the back of one, I think the second volume. So this was also very influential to me, which was this sort of a field matrix phenomena that could be graphed. Like in fine art, you have color field, and this is another way of exploring the field by articulating a matrix of points. And you can have objects that are nested in the field. That object it looks kind of cubical, but it's called a rhombic dodecahedron. So that also was very, had an impact on me. And this is something that, very simple little drawing, but it's something that a Swiss mathematician had codified these relations. These are like fundamental properties of polyhedra. You have lines or trajectories, you have crossings, you have openings or windows, and those come together to create a tetrahedron. So I thought perceptually, yes, perception is a polyhedral experience because you have all those phenomenologies at play when you're looking and discerning the world. And so I just continued on exploring that. This is almost like kind of like cubism sort of stuff, but using some of the geometry. On the far right is a cluster of almost all space-filling forms called cuboctahedrons, and they're kind of mapped with some of the sort of the figurative data, if you will, that are on the left side of the picture are mapped over those forms. And that's a graphite drawing. That's a close-up of that. So it's kind of like the structure, that metaphorical structure of, I don't know, sort of like impacted resonance of a scene that's happening, like any action kind of like vibrates for a time, and lingers. So it's kind of like that, but it's in a crystalline form. So anyway, I'm getting close into computer graphics, but this was sort of like the culmination of some of these explorations in pen and ink and graphite. So I was sort of balanced between drawings as well as painting. So a good friend of mine, also a Buckminster Fuller person, built this cluster, the similar cuboctahedron, out of toothpicks, actually, Russell Chu, and it's called IVM, which is, in Bucky terminology is isotropic vector matrix, and that sounds complicated, but it's kind of like everywhere the same, a matrix of vectors that are the same length, and they're configured into this shape, the cuboctahedron. So I kind of, this is almost like an Escher type thing. Escher would make models and then draw them and then insert them into a 2D composition, so it was kind of mirroring that way of working. So I'm going to speed up a little bit now so we can get into. I had some artist statement, and I'm getting ready. I'm kind of unpacking my archive because I want to publish a book. So some of this stuff is coming out of that, and hopefully later this year I can maybe do a Kickstarter campaign or something, or Indiegogo maybe, to raise the funds to make this happen. So these are paintings. And this is a transitional painting, Ectoplasmic Kitchen. And so that last slide was out of place there. That said 1997, but actually 1987. This is I got into computer graphics in about 83, 84, but it took about 4 years to really sort of be able to kind of sort of master it well enough where I felt like, oh yeah, here's a sort of I'm back to the level that I used to be at with traditional media. And this, you could see the Escher and Fuller influence that's kind of manifesting here. And this is called Ectoplasmic Kitchen. And this is simple, almost like Illustrator type software, just vector-based kind of stuff. It did have a Z buffer. And so I'm exploring something that I explored in oil painting, and that's something I did when I first started with computer graphics, is try to revision images and subjects that I created in traditional media. And this kind of shows you how that transition happened. The oil painting on top left and a computer graphics version of it. So this space frame concept, part of my thing to share the early traditional media conceptioning is that became sort of, the reservoir in which I drew from as I went forward into digital media to kind of those kinds of ideas. So at the same time, trying to master this new medium that was new to me, anyway. So these are sort of, this is from about 1989, 1990, I think. The title of the piece is 6/26/27/86. It's about an event that happened on that day. And these are variations of it. So this kind of took me into another period. And then I started on the PC, and I was also using the Cubicomp, which was a early computer graphics animation and modeling system that worked on the PC originally in the middle 80s. And then later I started getting into Photoshop. So this is kind of has Photoshop interventions along the top, to kind of using filters and tweaking it out a little bit more, and then some ray tracing in the sphere. This is another case of something done in 1990 and then going back in 2010 and tweaking it. I had a little bit more transparency going on in 2010. So here's another piece that I think a good handful of you have seen, to Tell Me the Truth. So you can see these influences kind of, I'm trying to sort of wrangle them together and make them work. There are some allusions to my earlier period, like it's hard to see, but there's a painting in the background, and that's one of my early paintings. So it's a photograph of people sitting around a table in front of my painting, and then, but also the guy on the right is kind of composited in, so he's added in to heighten the composition, kind of a psychological thing in a way. So this was a great honor to be included in a show, like a 12-person show in Rome in 1998. It was the MC Escher centennial, the 100-year centennial of his birth. He was born in 1898. So I was able to show a computer graphic work, which was that ectoplasmic kitchen. You can see, actually, this is his night and day here. And so that was an amazing honor. So I've had these experiences where things kind of come full circle and come back around. Oh, and the reason I showed that again, because I also showed this piece in that show. Okay, I thought I won't try to read some of this stuff, but some of this stuff is under the Buckminster Fuller influence. If we have time, we could come back to it, because it's pretty dense verbiage. Okay, I mean, certain. So anyway, 1993, getting into fractals and such, and this is kind of a fourplex. Still Cubicomp work. The sphere on the top right is actually a section of a photograph of one of my oil paintings and then mapped on a sphere. So I always thought this was kind of an interesting sort of quasi-narrative, just juxtaposing these four panels. And this is a little bit of showing you how a piece got put together. It started with a autobiographical photograph to the top left, and I'll pull that in. So when I was doing this, I was thinking, well, this is kind of like painting, but then years later, I think, well, really, maybe it's more like photography, compositing, it's a photographic thing. It's both, really, but this kind of shows you how, to bring springboard from a photographic source and then add computer-generated elements and then tweak out, image process the photograph. And then it gets refined and distilled down to specific, more finished compositions like this one. And then there's a variation like that. And this is a piece from 1993, but it's kind of looking back. I moved to New York in 1995. I was there till about 2009, and I went there before then. I think I was there in 83 and 85. So this was kind of like, it was a photograph at a party So sometimes I would do that. I would find a photograph that I took 20 years ago, and I would look at it in a new way, and I go, wow, this would be a great springboard for a composition. So that's what this is about. And I was using another software then, just that I forget the name of it now, but that could do 3D modeling and ray tracing. And then this is a piece some of you probably have seen. I posted it recently on my Facebook page, X Hour, 1994. Here again, it's a photographic piece, but tweaked out with sort of surrealist or metaphorical or allegorical elements, bilateral symmetry. It has a lot of different things going on. And those spheres with sort of like this kind of like graphical noise. So there's a lot happening. The original photograph was taken in a bar in Greece outside of Athens, I think in about 1991. So it's another case of appropriating a photograph from my own library and then springboarding from that. Sunburst couple. I haven't shown this very much, but it was kind of a fun composition. 2001. So I was just, the 20-year window of making digital prints, exploring the ideas that I first got interested in. Escher Girl. This one reason I call it Escher Girl, because this is my first show at Steve's House of Fine Art in Hollywood, 1982. In the background is that piece, fourfold rotational loss with pencil drawing. But this lady, I've never seen her again, but she came with this sort of frock with an Escher pattern on it. It's kind of interesting. So hence the title, Escher Girl. The void matrix is another metaphor. I didn't really talk much about that, but that was a book that I was reading like in the late 70s called The Tao of Physics, was also very influential. I think it was published in 1978. And it talked about the description of reality with Eastern mystics and Western subatomic physicists are similar because they're kind of accessing with their various perceptual tools this notion of the void plenum or the void matrix. And I had the notion is we can actually access that realm, the realm that's sort of like this eternal stillness, but at the same time it's like full of potentiality. There really is, there's no such thing as a void, or there's no such thing as nothingness, but you get a handle on it with this notion of the void matrix. So that's kind of what this is about, accessing that realm. And using, periodic space division to articulate the space that's first sort of presented by a straight-ahead photograph. It is sort of this charged, energetic space that normally is sort of invisible to us. It's the space between things, but we can feel the energy. The resonance is kind of the notion. So it was great to have this piece was kind of highlighted, and it was put in this book called The Art of the Digital Age, which was published in 2006, and that was a great honor. Skull was 1994. It's like two found digital objects, a human skull and a deer's head. And the lace maker, influenced by Johannes Vermeer, the famous lace maker that he did, I think in 1665. And I was at a New Year's Eve party in New York, and this woman, the necklace had broken, and this woman was reassembling it. And in that instant, I thought, wow, she looks like the lace maker. So I took the photograph and then later added this geometry. It has to do with this sort of resonance sort of thing happening. So anyway, I'm going to speed up. I'm actually want to switch gears. I'm going to go fast here. Well, highlight this. I had a wonderful opportunity to collaborate with Billy Name, who was Andy Warhol's photographer at the factory in 1963 to about 68. And he liked my work, and you remember the Silver Studio, Andy Warhol, and that was Billy Name. He was the first guy to put silver on everything. And so he liked the fact that I was working with this metallic sort of silvery geometry. So he lent me some of his photographs, some of his original negatives that he let me scan. So there's some of some superstars there. And there's, these are the famous Warhol screen tests, Bob Dylan and Edie Sedgwick. And he took the photographs, production stills. So anyway, there's more here, but okay, well what I want to do now is, in just a moment, is play a few videos for about 10, 15 minutes, because I kind of, as I was saying before, I was getting into time-based work. Let's see. And this is a very early experiment. Even though I kind of think of my time-based period as really starting in around 07, in 96 and 98, I started doing a few experiments with just kind of looping geometry, and just to kind of see what that looked like and what kind of relationships would emerge by seeing a kind of a polyhedral structure animated. What kind of other residual perceptual effects emerge from that. And those are stills. And the skull got onto the cover of Leonardo a few years later. And many of these videos that I'm going to show, I've actually shown here at the gallery in previous shows, like towards the end of last year and earlier this year. But I thought it would be fun to represent them where you can see them large and with a louder sound, outside of the headphones. So that's what we're going to look at. Before I do that, let me just show you a little, that Vortex Engine. This is a low-res thing, but just could get an idea of what that was about. And it just kept looping. And it went on. I had a version that went on for like 6 hours. And it was like an installation piece. Yeah. Just silent looping. Okay. So this is a piece which I kind of sort of affectionately think of as AV jazz, like audiovisual jazz. Thank you. Thank you. So I won't play it twice, but you kind of get the idea. But this is the music is composed by a good friend of mine, Dick Wood, and an ensemble of really a lot of amazing musicians. Some of you may recognize some of these names up there. Okay. Let's jump ahead. Now here's another piece that's a collaboration with a friend of mine named Chris Holland, and he has kind of a nom de plume, if you will. Igor Amokian is his sort of pen name, and he works with circuit bending technologies, taking like appropriating children's toys and other kinds of sound generating objects or toys basically, and tweaking out the circuits and making them into these kind of musical instruments, but kind of really abstracted. So that's the soundtrack comes from that. And it's a little piece called "Walking A Walk in the City." Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, I guess it's kind of a play out on the title. Recapitulation of the track. Okay, let's see. Okay, well, this is a little bit different. It's more of a, it's sort of this one's sort of like a self-portrait and sort of a dreamscape. And many of you have seen this one too. And the soundtrack is by some friends of mine, a band called Hookah, and Ward Randall. I don't know if Ward is here tonight, but he's kind of the leader of that band. And they do abstract improvisation, sort of electronic kinds of things. And so the soundtrack is played live and it's purely improvised on the spot. And it's a recording of it, but, and I'm just pulling out a section of maybe a 30-minute composition. Okay, let me see if I can make it just a little bit louder and I can control it here. Thank you. Okay, let's see. Let me play. This is another one by Ward's band, the soundtrack that is, Hookah, and this is another one that I exhibited here, and it's called Terabyte Psychedelics. It's kind of a fun piece here. So, once again, a live gig. Should I turn this off? I sense that. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. So I just want to break into Q&A in just a moment, but I want to, like, Rex was talking about some early shows, and I wanted to share with you some, like, posters from some of those shows, and because there's lots has gone on in Los Angeles, but it wasn't really well known at the time. So I want to do a quick little tour of some of that history encapsulated by some promos. Okay, so this was a cover story on computer art in 1993, and this was when the Cyberspace gallery was active at EZTV. And you can kind of, even in on a computer graphics context or in a magazine, you could see the theme of it, computer art, still struggling for acceptance. And as a way of kind of trying to reach out to the audience outside the computer graphics world. And this is a poster from a show at EZTV. This was the Cyberspace gallery. This is from, you can see, 1993. And it was called Digital Salon de Independence. And that was fun. There's some recognizable names there you might see. There's Michael Wright, I see, Stuart McSherry, myself, Donna Guy, Tony Longson. I just have the last names there. Yes, Roscoe. Nancy Macco and like that. So I guess Hebert, or maybe that's Jean-Pierre Hebert, maybe. Paris Cole there. So, and then here's a show that Michael Wright and I did. You might remember, some of you might remember this. He's, oh, there he is. Yeah, he's still around. He's still around, yeah. Digital Duality. This is when EZTV had moved to Santa Monica, and this is what Rex was talking about, the 18th Street Art Complex. And we did this in 2002, and this was a time we showed together. It was a lot of fun. Now, this is an interesting flyer. This is at LACDA in 2005, Los Angeles Center for Digital Art, an earlier location called Synapse. And so that was fun. It was in conjunction with ACM SIGGRAPH at that time, and there were some panel discussions, a big panel discussion that was attached to it. And David M., Kate Johnson, Tony Longzin, Michael Masucci. Annalisa is here. She was in this show. And, of course, Michael Wright. So that was good fun. We took some video of this show, so at some point we might publish it, post it. Yeah. Right. So this was another important show that sort of came and went. The general public didn't really know it was going on. Also Easy TV. This was called Art 1990, and this was from the West Hollywood location. This was a catalog that was published. It was in conjunction with the Los Angeles SIGGRAPH. It's another Easy TV show, Hacking the Timeline. It's curated by Michael Masucci. Annalise is in that show as well. You can see her piece there on the left. Tony Long's in there on the center. This is what the Cyberspace gallery looked like. It was the upstairs, kind of almost like the attic of the Easy TV location on Santa Monica Boulevard. We totally renovated. This was an early show. I'm not quite sure which one it was, but that's what it looked like. It was very sort of almost like a raw space that was, given a facelift to show digital art. There's another show. Michael Wright and I collaborated on putting this together, and it was actually a bi-coastal show at Digital Site, and it was a downtown location. It was 719 West 7th Street between Hope and Figueroa downtown, and this was 1995. And we had a kind of a counterpoint show in New York on St. Mark's Place, and we didn't have we couldn't pull it off with the technology. If we were to do it now, it would be like a piece of cake. You could just do, iPhone Live kind of thing. And I was kind of influenced by the hole in space concept to try to have this dual opening across the coasts, East Coast, West Coast. So that didn't quite happen, but the concept was there, and it was intended to be a bi-coastal show. Please, anybody have any questions about the proceeding or about any? Okay.
Were your paintings, or were they screen images that you created? You said this is what I did. Was that a screen or was it a painting?
Yeah, those early works were actually, most of them were oil on canvas, actual real paintings. Oh, thank you. My drawings. So, anyone else have a question here?
I was wondering if you would tell us what you see as your intention when you made, let's say, the last video you showed us.
The psychedelic, Terabyte psychedelics, what my intention is?
And if there is, what would be the message you're trying to convey?
It's kind of more like an opportunity to go have an experience that's outside, like non-ordinary reality, using kind of a gentle graphical vehicle. That's kind of what it's about. Like instead of dropping acid, you can kind of get there digitally. And it kind of points to VR. What's that?
And you can do it legally.
Yeah, you could do it legally. Yeah, exactly. So it's pointing to VR experience that would kind of a new form of psychedelics in a way. That would be my intention. And the musicians that I'm collaborating, that's part of their intention too, is to kind of have this soundscape that'll kind of like allow you to kind of step outside your normal reality for a little bit, but in a fun way, but just to kind of go somewhere else. So it's, and there is a structural narrative. So that's primarily my intention on that. And the message? Well, the message is, I think it's good to sort of step out of your normal reality every once in a while. That's my message, I would say.
Hi, Victor.
Yeah, hi.
My question is, you said you were really influenced by Buckminster Fuller, right?
Fuller, yes.
And I wanted to know what was it that what message did he have? And also, when you did your tetrahedrons and the shapes, was there some guiding principle in terms of what those shapes were, like the construction of the shapes?
Buckminster Fuller, he wrote these two books about kind of a new way of mapping the structure of local universe using a more spherical approach and a triangulated approach as opposed to a cubical approach. So that's an important part of what he was doing. The geodesic dome is like a special case application of this kind of spherical geometry. And the principles and the rules that the Polyhedra have are very exacting, but they could also be loose. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but there's a lot there in terms of, it's like a whole lexicon, a geometrical language that's accessible, to me it has implications in perception, certainly in structure, having to do with like the structure of perception. But it's just very interesting. There's a very close correlation between some of the Polyhedra and what people call sacred geometry. So there's that link as well. So yeah, Fuller they say he's, he was way ahead of his time in terms of the sustainability, doing more with less. There's so many implications to Fuller's work, but the lesser known thing is his investigations into geometry. So I hope I'm answering your question. He could, yeah. Yeah, it's there. These can be springboards for that. That notion of, say you were you're inside of a crystal, for example, and you're having this sort of like omnidirectional resonant experience, and you have this symmetry going around you, this omnidirectional symmetry. So yeah, we could, in a sense, embody that kind of crystalline, new age, sacred geometrical space. So it's there. These are just, in a sense, pointers to that experience. Obviously, they're just, but yeah, I think there's something to that. I think, the idea of dome theaters and all of that, the three, that's kind of we're in the middle, the early stages of a new revolution in terms of virtual reality and 360 experiences, and it's a natural to do polyhedra and spherical things in that realm. So yeah.
Next question's over here.
Okay.
Victor, regarding two of your works,
Yes.
one was called The Walk in the Park, and the other was called Tetrahedral Psychedelics. What was that called?
Yeah, Terabyte Psychedelics.
Okay. So the first question is, I noticed that in the Walk in the Park, there was what you do visually was like a rhythmic counterpoint to what was going on orally, and I'm wondering what your approach was toward your rhythmic counterpoint, whether it was just kind of riffing in the moment, or if you had an overriding schematic or something, maybe like da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, da-da-da, over and over, but it looked obviously really complicated. So I'm wondering what your approach to the rhythm was in counterpoint with I guess it was Marty playing that? That wasn't Marty.
Yeah, there was imagery of Marty, the drummer in the sphere.
Okay.
For this,
So
yeah.
counterpoint to what I heard, I saw, right, a rhythmic counterpoint.
Yeah.
The other question is, where can I get some of those psychedelics from that other one?
Yeah. That's cool. That's cool. Yeah, there's, the composition is there, and part of my role, I feel, is to visualize, the rhythmic pattern that was first generated by the musician. And I can do that by trying to have a tight sync with it, That's where the visual music component comes in.
It would be in sync occasionally, but
Yeah.
a lot of the times it was obviously its own rhythmic voice.
Yes, exactly. That's very, very, very true. To sync sometimes and then come off it and do something else and then come back. And I'd like to think that's what it's doing. It's, there's sort of like meeting points where it's in sync, but then there's this other.
So you sort of cycle, sort of?
Yeah, it's the same, it's like the same piece twice, and it changes slightly in terms of the visual from the part 1 to part 2.
Did you think about it in terms of eighth notes and quarter notes and 16, or
Not so much.
microtime,
Oh, I see.
little patterns, or was it just kind of extemporaneous from left to right, I guess?
Yeah, it's more like extemporaneous, and some of those things just happen accidentally. They're happy accidents where there might be some kind of like vibrating graphic or something that's embedded in the beat, but I'm not, really syncing it directly, but it's kind of playing off of it. So I think that's what you're.
Interesting rhythmic flow that occurred in counterpoint, so I was just wondering.
Okay, thanks, thank you. Let's see. Leah? Oh, Mark? Hi.
Speaking of yours perception,
Yes.
I was wondering, whether you closely and used the mathematical constructs built around the concept of the zero and the originators of that concept in mind, and how you brought your personal sensibilities into your art, and whether this I know some people glibly ask about drugs and stuff, but the fact of the matter is there are different ways of perceiving reality, and we understand that there's different ways of going to certain depths. Have you looked at to see in an ethnographic sense, in terms of your own personal ethnicity, these images? I know a lot of your work is has a lot of Western feel to it, but to what degree is your work more influenced by the Mexican in you?
Well, it's in there, and I recently had a piece. I have it on my Facebook page called "Huichol Ghost," which refers to the Huichol Indians, and part of my ancestry, I'm told, the family legend is we have Huichole blood. And those of you who know the Huicholes, they're from central Mexico, and their society is built around peyote. So there is that atavistic connection, I think, that goes on. And that ghost image just kind of manifested accidentally. I didn't try to make it. It was just by tweaking out the geometry with a real-time, VJ software, but that image emerged, and it reminded me of the Huichole art. So yeah, I believe there's something to there. You can't help it. It's atavistic traits, the way that are part of, it's in my DNA. So I'll process reality through that filter just naturally. But so that I guess that's what comes to mind when you ask that. So thank you.
I am curious, who is doing work today that's in the vein of what you do that you really admire?
That's a good question. There's so much. I'm following a lot of the younger artists that are coming up, and they're experimenting in the VR space. I've seen a lot of great work here at this gallery. Well, you see different things, at any given moment in the digital art milieu, something will pop out at you.
Yeah, I was just curious if there was 2 or 3 names that rose to the top in your world.
Oh, yeah, I see. Yeah, my relationship to other artists has kind of morphed a little bit. Like when I was telling my story, I had early influential artists that were really had an impact on me. Now it's a more sort of amorphous thing. I mean, there's tons of work. Like, here's Jay Walt right here. His work is, I'm very much influenced by what he's doing, in a sense that I love what he's doing. So, there's a lot of practitioners. Michael Wright's doing, many people in this room are doing very interesting work. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I couldn't say so much like, look at so-and-so.
right,
Nobody
thanks.
comes to mind other than a few people in this room. One more. Oh, okay. We do one more thing. Thanks. Oh yeah, it was 7:43. Yeah. Anybody want to ask the final question?
Victor, I'm just curious if you could talk about some of your technical process as to how you create the videos and what you use, and a little bit about the process, because you say, oh, painting for the paintings, that's great, but when you're kind of creating these video things, I'm curious, how you go about it. What do you do?
Yeah. Let's see. Well, the videos with sort of live action stuff are just pretty much straightforward, video capture, and but I'm building. Most of these videos had 3D geometry that was built in a program called Soft Image, but I'm using Cinema 4D now, and a lot of the models can be tweaked out in regard to the music by using a software called VDMX, which is like a VJ mixing software, and you could apply filters, and it's audio active, like the music can generate the way that it morphs the image. So that component is in there. So I can do several jam sessions, so to speak, of the track and play live to it and record it and then bring that into a standard like Premiere edit timeline and build it that way. So it's a combination. So that's primarily the technique I'm using. And then I will, so there are these real-time things going on in terms of mixing on the fly, but there's also kind of like just sort of hand-edited placing, relating to the sonic events on the timeline. So that's primarily how I do it. So, thank you.
Yeah, let's hear it for Victor.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming. All right. So, we have a few minutes to take a few more drinks.